My name is Carol. I am 82 years old, with hands marked by wrinkles and a voice that, although it trembles from age, still holds secret flames burning deep inside me. I have lived alone for many years in a small house whose walls are starting to bow and windows that let in more wind than light. I have never truly had a husband, though sometimes I lied to my neighbours, telling them I had married young to a good man who died early, just to stop their questions. My existence has shrunk to the sound of an old radio in the kitchen, occasional visits from my great-niece Jane, who brings my medicine, and the flood of memories that come uninvited when night falls. For more than 70 years, I have tried to bury what I endured, hiding it like one hides a wounded animal in the back of a closet so no one hears its cries. Yet some wounds do not heal with time, silence, or age. There are sorrows that become part of your body, like a broken bone that never properly mended. That is why today, after so long, I sit before this recorder, because I can no longer carry the burden of what I kept silent. I do not seek pity or redemption, nor do I want to be called brave. I was not brave. I was a shattered child, an invisible teenager, a woman exhausted from surviving as best I could. And if I speak now, it is because perhaps, just perhaps, somewhere out there is someone listening. This is for any woman who needs to hear that she is not alone, that what she has experienced or is going through is not her fault. Even in the darkest places, a flower can bloom, though it may be crooked, withered, and damaged by the smoke. My story begins in a dusty neighborhood of Ciudad Juarez, where the houses looked as if built from the scraps of others, and stray dogs slept beneath rusty cars. I was born in 1943, the daughter of a woman who never learned how to love, and a man I never met. My mother's name was Jane. She was young, beautiful, with a body that caught glances from every corner, yet her mouth rarely spoke kind words. She did not know how to touch gently, how to hug, or how to comfort. It was as if life had toughened her far too soon. She used to say that she had to learn to live with sharp claws, because otherwise life would swallow her whole. I grew up watching her apply makeup before the broken living room mirror with quick hands and a weary expression. She was always at war with the world, always shouting, constantly demanding. I never truly knew if she loved me or if she simply tolerated me because she had no other choice. When I asked about my father, she would laugh bitterly and say, "Why do you want to know about that bastard?" Then she would light a cigarette and go out the door in her worn heels, leaving behind the scent of cheap perfume and nicotine. I do not remember having a happy childhood. My earliest memories are blurry, as if my mind deliberately obscured the worst parts so they would hurt less. Yet what I do recall clearly is the persistent feeling of not belonging. I never felt part of anything. I was not the girl running with others in the street, nor the one wearing bows in her hair. I was the one watching from the window, pretending to be sick to avoid going to school, the one hiding in the closet when my mother brought her friends home. From an early age, I understood that the men who came through that door were not there to bring bread or affection. They came to drink, to curse loudly, to laugh with their mouths wide open, to look at my child's body as if I were no longer a child. Sometimes a visitor stayed for several days, and I knew during that time I had to walk on tiptoes, avoid making noise, stay out of their way. I learned to vanish in my own home. I made myself small, hid under the blankets, covered my ears. I do not know if I was ever a normal child. Maybe I never was. My mother was always in debt, constantly owing something: the gas, the electricity, the rent, the beans. There was always a hole she could not fill. She said the world was against her, that nobody would give her a job, and denounced other women as hypocrites living off their husbands. I did not understand much. I only listened. But soon I noticed that whenever things got tough, a new boyfriend would appear. Some lasted weeks, others only one night. But there was one who stayed. His name was Roger. I never knew if that was truly his real name. He was a large man with a thick moustache and a rough voice. He wore a hat even inside the house and carried a strong scent like dried sweat and hard liquor. The first time I saw him, I felt afraid. I could not explain why, but something inside me shrank. I was 11 years old and already understood without words what a man like that could mean in the life of a girl like me. From the very first day Roger stepped through the door of our home, I sensed that something was about to change, that something was coming, that my silence, which by then was like a second skin, was going to grow deeper, heavier, more merciless. But I am not ready to tell that story yet. Not now. Before that, I need to explain why it took me so long to speak out, why I kept this buried in my heart like a burning stone for more than 70 years. It was not because I feared punishment or because someone told me to keep quiet. It was because I never realized that what I lived through was wrong. Growing up surrounded by shadows makes darkness seem normal. When your mother teaches you to be silent, to lower your gaze, to obey, even if your soul is breaking inside, you end up believing that this is what it means to be a woman. I had no words for what I was experiencing. I did not know I could say, "This hurts. I do not want this. This is breaking me." All I knew was how to be silent, how to swallow my tears, sleep on an empty stomach, and stare at the ceiling for hours without moving. I used to pretend that I did not feel, that I was not, that I did not exist. Now that I am old, now that I no longer care about what others think, now that I understand that death is drawing closer with each passing day, I realize that I do not want to leave without having spoken the truth, without having named what was taken from me. Not my childhood, not my innocence, not my body. What was stolen from me was my right to feel loved, to grow up without fear, to have beautiful memories, to be a child like any other. And although I cannot change the past, I can share my story. Because when a woman reveals her truth, she takes power away from the monster, since what remains unnamed continues to devour quietly, and I no longer want to be consumed. The memory that transported me back to those times was neither a dream nor a nightmare. It was something small, seemingly insignificant, just as often happens. It was the embrace of my great-granddaughter, that girl with light eyes and a gentle voice who comes to visit me some Sundays with her neatly braided hair and a backpack full of drawings. That day, while she was helping me wash some cups, she suddenly hugged me around the waist without warning and said in a voice so soft it was barely audible, "Thank you for taking care of me, Grandma. You are the best." It was a simple phrase, one of those that children say without understanding the weight they carry, but it broke me. I felt a knot in my stomach, and without her noticing, I excused myself, saying I had a headache, and went to the bathroom. I locked the door, sat down on the toilet seat, lowered my gaze, and then the tears came. But it was not a quiet cry. It was one of those silent sobs that force you to clench your teeth and erupt from deep within your chest. I wept, like I had not done since my teenage years. I looked at my hands, these aging hands that now tremble, and asked myself, did I ever feel that kind of love? Did anyone ever take care of me? Or what? Did someone think of me as a little girl deserving protection? That was when my mind dragged me back, as it often does without warning, to that damp, dark room from my childhood. A room without toys, soft blankets, or gentle voices. A room with a metal bed frame that creaked every time I moved. A rough blanket that smelled of moisture, and a tiny window letting in just a bit of light. I spent many silent nights there, pretending to sleep as the footsteps of my mother and Roger approached from down the hall. Sometimes they laughed, other times they argued, and at times the whole house seemed ready to explode. But I had learned to stay still. I pretended to be asleep, squeezing my eyes shut so tightly that my eyelids ached. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming, and when Roger entered the room, I would turn to stone, because life had taught me that the body of a poor girl does not belong to her. The first time it happened, I was barely 11 years old. It was just an ordinary night, one of those moments when the power would go out and darkness would take over. My mother was sitting in the kitchen with him, drinking warm beer and listening to music on the radio. I was in my room, reading by the light of a single candle. When I heard his footsteps approaching, I thought he was headed to the bathroom. But no. He opened the door without knocking, looked at me with those cloudy eyes and said, "Your mum tells you to behave, to cooperate. Things are tough, and the rent has to be paid." At first, I did not understand, or maybe I just did not want to. But when he got closer and grabbed my arm, a cold fear froze me from the inside. I tried to scream, but he covered my mouth. It was quick, violent, like crushing a flower beneath a foot. After he left, I stayed still for hours, motionless, the candle still burning and my gaze fixed on the wall. I did not cry. I did not know how. It felt as if my body no longer belonged to me, as if I had abandoned it. The next day, my mother did not look me in the eyes. She set a plate of cold rice on the table and said, "Do not say anything. He is doing us a favor. Do not be ungrateful." I was 11 years old. 11. At that age, a girl should be playing with dolls, running outside, inventing tales of castles and princesses. But that day, I realized my mother had betrayed me, that in her twisted mind, her daughter was a bargaining chip, that having a roof over our heads meant more to her than protecting my innocence. From that night on, everything changed forever. Roger settled into the house as if he were the owner. I became invisible. I walked with my gaze lowered, avoided his presence, and locked myself in the bathroom whenever I could. But it was useless. He did whatever he wanted. My mother allowed him to. I did not exist. I was just a useful body, something that could be used in exchange for not sleeping on the street. The word love lost its meaning. No one cared for me, no one defended me, no one asked about me. At school, I started missing classes, not because I did not want to learn, but because I was afraid that someone would notice my bruises, my dark circles, my awkward way of walking. Also, sometimes after the worst nights, my body couldn't even hold itself up. One afternoon, a teacher approached me and asked if everything was all right at home. I remember replying yes, that I was just a little tired. She nodded, touched my shoulder gently, and said if I ever needed to talk, She was there for me. But I did not speak. I could not. If I said anything, my mother would kick me out. Or worse, I had already learned that what happened at home was not to be revealed, that poor women stay silent, that pain is swallowed and not told. That is how I learned to keep quiet, and that silence stayed with me for years. It got into my bones, into my breathing, into my dreams. The memory of that moment with my great-granddaughter was not just an emotion, it was an explosion. It made me look back with a clarity I did not have as a child. It helped me understand what I had experienced, what my mother allowed, what that man did, had a name, carried weight, brought consequences. It was not an accident, nor a mistake. It was violence, abuse, betrayal. It was a stolen childhood, traded as if I were an old piece of furniture given away in exchange for another month without being evicted. All of that shaped me, twisted me, made me wary, tough, closed off. It prevented me from making friends, finding love, pursuing dreams. It taught me to live half a life, to protect myself from everyone, to expect nothing good from anyone. Now that I am at the end of the journey, no longer afraid of my mother or that man who must be dead by now, I realize I do not want to carry this pain to the grave without ever naming it. What pushed me to speak was not only the tenderness of that little girl, but also the chance that another woman might be listening, maybe in another country, another home, another life, but with the same wound. If that woman remains silent as I did, I want her to know there are others like her, that she is not alone, that what happened does not define her. She does not have to forgive if she does not want to. Silence is not dignity. It is a prison. Even if years pass, even if her hair turns white and her bones grow tired, it is never too late to say, "This happened to me," and to say, "It was not my fault." After that first time when Roger entered my room as if he were a client and I were an object promised to him, his presence was... The fear became constant, almost unbearable, like a heavy shadow settling over every corner of the house. It was no longer just the fear of the moment itself, but a constant dread, knowing at any given time it could happen again. There were no schedules or rules. Whenever he wanted, he would simply show up, take me, hurt me, and then leave as if nothing had happened. The worst part was that my mother knew. She knew from day one. Sometimes she would be in the kitchen while he passed by toward my room. Sometimes she pretended to be asleep. Other times she just ignored me for hours after everything was over, as if silence could erase the marks, as if her indifference was a justification. Over time, I stopped looking into her eyes. I could not, because in her gaze there was no compassion, no guilt, no love. Only resignation, that hard, cold resignation of someone who had long ago decided to stop feeling. To her, I was not her daughter, but a resource, a temporary solution, a lesser sacrifice compared to the risk of losing our roof, going back to sleeping under bridges, or being devoured by hunger. I kept going to school, but less and less often. I became a shadow, walking with hunched shoulders, as if trying to vanish, as if my body weighed too much to carry. I did not speak. I did not answer in class. Sometimes I sat in the last row and stayed silent, looking out the window, watching the other girls playing in the yard, laughing, pushing each other, tugging at each other's braids. I did not know how to laugh like that. I did not know how to push in play. My body was no longer a safe place. It had become a battlefield. Each day that passed, something inside me broke a little more. I started having stomach pains, unexplained bleeding, and nausea every morning. I thought I was dying, that something rotten was growing inside me. One day I fainted at school. They took me to the nurse's office. When I woke up, a woman in a white coat asked if I had already had my first time. I did not know how to answer. I bit my lips until they bled. They sent me home with a note that my mother never read. That night, Roger came to visit me again, as if nothing had happened. My room was a prison without bars. I no longer had a lock because he had broken it. There was no latch either, since my mother said that would be suspicious. I slept fully dressed, with my shoes on, hoping I could run away. But where could I go? Who would welcome me? I had no grandparents, no aunts, no one. Only her, the woman who gave me life and then handed me over without hesitation. When we walked on the street during the few times we went out together to buy food or get water, she spoke to me in an almost normal tone, as if nothing had changed. She asked me to buy bread and wash the clothes. She never forgot to sweep the yard, and I obeyed her, but inside I was laughing. The blood, because I could not understand how she could speak to me like that after everything. Because I could not understand how her face stayed unbroken. Because I could not understand why I was the one who had to stay silent and act as if nothing was wrong. Sundays were especially difficult. In my neighborhood, Sundays were days of church services, attended by well-dressed families, walking arm in arm to the downtown church. I watched them from the window, envying those scenes of mothers brushing their daughters' hair, fathers carrying children on their shoulders, people who looked clean inside. At my home, however, Sundays were days of confinement. Roger did not work. He spent the entire day sitting at the table drinking beer and listening to the radio. My mother served him as if he were a master, and I had to stay close within reach, not moving too far away because he would get angry if I disappeared. If I tried to stay in my room, he came looking for me. If I went out to the yard, he shouted my name with a voice that made me tremble. My whole body reacted as if an alarm was going off. Sweat on my hands, shaking legs, waves of nausea. I lived in constant alertness. I could not sleep well. I did not eat. I became like a ghost. One afternoon, I overheard him talking with a neighbor. He said I was already growing well and that soon I would be useful in another way. At first, I did not understand. But then I grasped everything. It was clear. Planning to sell me, rent us out, gain a bit more. At that moment, I felt the ground crack beneath me, because until then, I had believed what was happening in that house was terrible, but hidden. It was a trapped nightmare, yet he wanted to throw open the doors to that nightmare. He wanted others to come in, and my mother was aware of this. I heard her say, "Just make sure he does not notice. If she gets pregnant, then we are really in trouble." I was 12 years old. 12. And they spoke about me as if I were merchandise, as if I had no eyes, no ears, no soul. That night I locked myself in the bathroom for hours, sat on the cold floor, and wished I could die. I thought of swallowing all the pills in the cabinet. I considered throwing myself into the well in the yard. I longed to vanish completely, yet I did not do it. Not for myself, but for a reason I did not yet understand. Something that kept me alive. It was stubbornness, something deep inside me that still resisted and whispered, "No, this will not last forever." After that, I began writing on scraps of paper. I did not have a notebook, so I tore pages out of old magazines I found in the trash. I wrote what I felt, what I thought, what I dreamed, I hid those scraps under the mattress, inside shoes, between the roof tiles. It was how I existed. No one read them, no one saw them, but I knew they were there. It was my only voice, my only act of rebellion. Sometimes I imagined that someday someone would find these papers and understand everything. That perhaps in the future, when I was no longer alive, someone would understand what had happened to me. Writing saved me. It was the only thing I could do without being hit or assaulted. It was a secret act of defiance, yet the fear remained. It grew more intense, more constant. Roger became more violent. He no longer came only at night. Sometimes, in the middle of the day while my mother was at the market, he would enter my room, threaten me, push me against the wall, and tell me that if I spoke, cried, or tried to leave, he would kill me. And I believed him, because it was no longer just physical fear. It was the certainty that I had no one. There was no grandmother to take me in, no neighbour to protect me. People in the neighbourhood suspected, but no one spoke up. They glanced at me strangely, whispered among themselves. But silence felt easier than confronting the truth. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted to take responsibility for a broken child. There was one day I will never forget. It was raining, the house was damp, smelling of wet clothes and sour soup. I was sitting in the kitchen cleaning beans. Roger came in, looked me up and down and said, "It is time you start working seriously. I am going to introduce you to a godfather of mine. He is trustworthy." I didn't know what to say, how to defend myself. I just looked at him, and that was my worst mistake because he took it as a challenge. He grabbed my arm, pulled me up abruptly, slammed me against the wall, and said that if I did not learn to obey, things would get worse for me. That night, my nose bled for hours. My mother handed me a cloth and told me not to stain the floor. That was all she said. No further words, no touch, no apology. She simply warned me not to make a scene, explaining that one must be clever in life. In that moment, I realized I was not her daughter, never truly had been. To her, I was merely a tool, a debt to be repaid with my body, a burden she chose to place on my shoulders so her own back would not break. It was difficult to comprehend and even harder to accept, but once I saw the truth clearly, something inside me shifted. I no longer loved her, nor feared her, nor needed her. She was just another woman, one among many who decide to survive by selling what does not belong to them, the souls of their daughters. For a long time I believed the life I lived was some kind of unavoidable punishment. It felt as if I had been born to endure suffering, as though pain was part of my fate. I thought the other girls, those with mothers who brushed their hair before school or packed lunches with fresh fruit, existed in a different world where I would never belong. In my childish mind, the word injustice did not exist. What existed was resignation. I had grown accustomed to viewing my body as separate from myself, an object used and harmed without any way to stop it. But as years passed, something began to change. Small cracks began to appear in the solid reality I had built to survive. These cracks did not burst open suddenly, nor spark an immediate uprising, but they planted a seed of doubt inside me that gnawed slowly at my core. What if this was not normal? And what if what I was experiencing should never happen to anyone else? And after all, what if I did not deserve this life? I recall very clearly a moment that marked that first deep uncertainty. It was an ordinary afternoon. I was walking alone through the neighborhood market, picking up some tortillas my mother had asked me to get. I was 14 years old. It was warm, and the air smelled of overripe fruit, sweat, and the exhaust of motorcycles. While waiting my turn, I noticed a girl about my age laughing with her mother, playfully nudging each other as they picked tomatoes. I watched them with a mix of curiosity and sadness. The mother bent down to whisper something, and the girl laughed with a free and genuine laughter I had forgotten. That vision made my chest ache. On my way home, I could not stop thinking about them. Why had I never laughed like that with my mother? Why had I never had a conversation free from commands, threats, or disdain? This simple scene, a mother and her daughter laughing together while shopping, stayed stuck in my mind like a needle in raw flesh, because it showed me clearly for the first time that what I had was no life at all. It was a sentence. It was not the only moment when I faced that harsh reality. I began to notice other things as well. A classmate named Renata once came up to me and said her mother would not let her go out alone because there are dangerous men on the streets. She looked at me with concern and asked if I had permission to go to the market by myself. I did not know how to answer, so I lied. I told her yes, that my mother trusted me a lot, but her words stayed with me. There are dangerous men on the streets. Then I wondered, what if the dangerous man is inside the house? What if he lives with you? If he sleeps just a few meters away, knows your name, has known you since you were a little girl and calls you little lady? That was when I started to realize that my feelings were not just sadness. It was something deeper, dirtier, and criminal. What Roger did was not love, not right, not tradition. It was abuse. It was evil. And what my mother did was not protection, but abandonment, betrayal, and complicity. This realization did not bring relief. On the contrary, it filled me with anger and fear. While I believed everything was part of unavoidable poverty, I could bear it. But knowing it was unjust, cruel, and a monstrous violation made everything weigh heavier. I could no longer close my eyes and pretend nothing was happening. I could no longer accept the nighttime visits as something I just had to endure to keep the peace. No longer. I could look at my mother without feeling my blood boil, but I still lacked the courage to confront her. I did not have the words yet, only an ever-increasing pain and a silence consuming me from within. I began paying more attention to others, observing people, overhearing conversations, and reading old magazines I found scattered around. I learned there were places called shelters. Although I never saw one, I understood there were laws, even if no one enforced them in the poor neighborhoods. I discovered that some women managed to escape, but I also read that many were returned to their abusers. All this knowledge stirred a confusing blend of hope and despair inside me. It made me feel there was a world beyond where I might become someone else, yet it also reminded me I was trapped, unseen, and unwanted. One day something happened that left a deep mark on me. Roger had hit me that morning because I could not find his belt. He threw me to the ground and kicked my stomach. I vomited, and breathing hurt. I lay for hours in the corner of the room with no one to help me. At dusk, a neighbor who usually brought bread came over. She knocked on the door, and my mother answered. I heard her say, "The girl has cramps. That's why she didn't come out today." Lies, rotten lies. The neighbor asked if she could see me. My mother said no, that I was asleep. Then I heard something I will never forget. The woman spoke in a low voice, but loud enough for me to hear clearly. Jane, don't deceive yourself. We all know what is happening, but sooner or later someone will speak up. Then she left. That sentence stunned me deeply, because for the first time I realized I was not as alone as I thought. Someone knew, someone saw, and my mother knew it too. She returned inside the house as if nothing had happened, but her eyes were dark, tight, full of anger. She did not say a word. She threw me a look that made me tremble, but it was already too late, because that neighbor's phrase planted something new in me. It was no longer just anger. It was determination. I did nothing that day or the next, but I began to think, to plan, to imagine, to wonder what would happen if I ran away, if I escaped, if I asked for help. It frightened me, terrified me, but it also gave me strength because I finally understood that what was happening was not fate. It was a crime. And staying silent only dragged me deeper. I began to hide money, to save coins I found on the ground, to pack small bundles of old clothes unnoticed. I prepared myself, though I did not yet know when I would act. But the important thing was that I no longer felt completely defeated. My body was still violated. My life was still a nightmare. But my mind had already started to break free from those chains. The turning point came one stormy night. It rained so heavily that the house shook with the thunder. I was lying in bed with the damp blanket clinging to my body. Roger came in as usual, drunk and staggering. But this time he looked at me differently. He told me it was time to make me a woman, and that phrase churned my stomach because I had already been through it so many times. What could it mean then? He came closer, grabbed my arm, and shouted at me not to make a scene, and for the first time I pushed him away. I did it with all my strength, all my fear, all my hatred, with the weight of all the history stored deep in my bones. He fell backwards, stumbled, hit his head against the wall and screamed. My mother rushed in. She saw me with my eyes wide open. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if she no longer knew who I was. And for a moment, just for a moment, I saw fear in her eyes. Not for me, but for him. For what he might do to her if he was too rough with me. That night they did not hit me. They did not violate me. They did not speak to me. They left me alone. Roger left the house. He came back 2 days later like nothing had happened, but I had already crossed a threshold. I was no longer the quiet girl, no longer the one who pretended to be asleep. Something inside me had woken up, and it was not going to close again, because I finally understood that living in fear is not normal, that it is not normal for your mother to sell you, that it is not normal for your body to be a debt paid by others. I understood that what they did to me was something I did not deserve, that no girl deserves that no silence justifies such horror. And although I still did not have the bravery to run away, to report, to completely break free from that world, I had already taken the first step, which was discovering the truth, naming it, feeling it without hiding any longer. And sometimes, just sometimes, that is enough to begin saving yourself. After that night, when I pushed him and saw fear in my mother's eyes for the first time, something inside me shifted, but something also changed in the household dynamic. Roger did not touch me for several days, maybe out of fear, maybe because the blow hurt him, or perhaps because he wanted to remind me that he held the power and could take it back whenever he wished. However, his absence during those first days was not a true relief, but a false calm. like the surface of a poisoned lake that looks peaceful but conceals death beneath the water. I did not stop being afraid. In fact, fear transformed into something else, into anticipation. I waited with tense muscles and alert ears for the moment he would decide to punish me for what I had done, because I knew he would. I knew that my small act of resistance would not come without cost. During that time, my mother almost completely stopped speaking to me. She only gave dry orders, cold looks, and silences heavier than any shouting. She no longer called me ungrateful. She no longer called me useless. She simply ignored me as if I did not exist, as if I were a nuisance to be endured out of necessity, but no longer even useful as a bargaining tool. The pain cut deeper than any harsh word, making me feel like a forgotten piece of furniture, something no longer useful or valued. Yet oddly, this distance gave me a small breathing space to reflect. I clung to that crack like a plant gripping a fractured wall to keep growing. However, this fragile sense of control was short-lived. One night, as I struggled to fall asleep, Roger returned to my room. He said nothing, merely stood in the doorway, staring at me and breathing heavily. A bottle hung in his hand, and he reeked of alcohol and sweat. After a long gaze, he spat on the floor. He told me I owed him respect, that no matter how brave I acted, I was still a spoiled child. His words turned harsher, dirtier, and more vicious, some of which I barely understood. He warned me that if I did not behave, worse things would happen. He said I was no longer a girl, but a female who could truly be used. Each phrase made my stomach churn, as if his words clung to my skin like sticky slime. I stayed frozen, unable to respond. I do not know if it was my legs trembling or the floor shifting beneath me. Yet that night, he did not touch me. Instead, he left, kicking the door. It felt worse than if he had acted because he left my fear alive, sharp, and pulsing. In the days that followed, everything became darker. Roger began bringing other men into the house. She said they were just friends, coming over to play cards, have a drink, and spend time together. But I could see how they looked at me, how they fell silent whenever I walked through the room, their eyes scanning me as if they already knew what I looked like without clothes. It disgusted me, embarrassed me, made me feel trapped with no chance to escape. One afternoon, I overheard Roger telling one of them he was considering making use of what he had at home, that it was time to stop keeping her just as decoration. I understood everything. He wanted to offer me, rent me out, use me to pay off other debts. My mother did not say a word. She was there washing dishes as if she did not hear, but I knew she had listened, and the fact that she neither denied it, argued, nor stopped it, confirmed to me that this was nothing new. She had thought it through and accepted it. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried for hours. I covered my mouth to keep quiet, but my whole body wept. I hurt everywhere. My back, arms, legs, breasts ached. I felt like my body was falling apart, that life was slipping out through my pores. I thought about ending it all. I seriously thought about it. I got down on my knees in front of the medicine cabinet and looked for pills or anything, but found nothing, only a bottle of alcohol, some old clothes, and a broken comb. I looked in the mirror and did not recognize myself. I was just a shadow, a shapeless thing with swollen eyes and a dry mouth. Yet something stopped me. I do not know what. Perhaps it was the image of that neighbor who had said, "Someone is going to talk." Maybe the memory of that little girl from the market laughing with her mother. Or possibly it was simply that I did not want them to win. I refused to let them have the final say. Days passed, and the atmosphere grew more strained. Roger kept intimidating me, but now he also wanted to show me off like a trophy. He forced me to sit in the living room when he came with his friends. He asked me to serve coffee, to bring cigarettes, and to bend down on purpose so they could look at my body. I obeyed with a churning stomach. I was terrified they might take me away, touch me, or make those threats come true. Every time I closed my bedroom door, it felt like I was escaping a pack of wild animals. My body ached, even without being touched, weighed down by their gazes. And my mother, sitting in her chair with her cigarette, motionless, not looking, not stepping in, had become a silent, complicit, absent figure. She was no longer a mother, but a dirty wall, a closed curtain, just another shadow in that house. Then one night, everything exploded. Roger arrived more drunk than ever. He had lost money gambling and was furious. He began yelling and breaking things. He threw a chair against the wall, kicked the table, spat on the floor. I was in the kitchen washing some dishes. My mother hid in her room. I was left alone with him. He called me. He shouted at me to come. He said that night he was going to settle accounts with me. I felt like my blood was boiling. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My legs trembled. I approached slowly, like a lamb going to the slaughter. Carol grabbed my arm, dragged me to the living room, threw me to the floor, shouted terrible things at me, lifted my clothes, hit me, scratched me, bit me, tore me apart inside and out. It was the worst night of my life because it was not just rape. It was torture, destruction, punishment. When he finished, he left me there, bleeding. He went to sleep as if nothing had happened. My mother never left her room, never asked, never opened the door. The next day I could not get up. I had a fever. My body was covered in bruises. I did not eat. I did not speak. I did not wash. I stayed lying there like a broken thing. And then, in that state, I decided I could no longer endure it, that if I stayed one more day in that house, I would die. I did not know how or when, but I would end up dead, because that house was not a home. It was a tomb where no one prayed, where no one cried for you. It was during those days, in that state, that my younger sister, a girl barely 5 years old, daughter of another man who had also disappeared, came to sit beside me. She stroked my arm and said, "Don't be sad, little sister. I will take care of you." And then everything inside me shattered because I understood that if I stayed, if I did not do something, one day Roger would come for her, and I could not allow that. I could not let him do to her what he did to me. I could not. I could not allow the cycle to repeat. I refused to become my mother. It was the gaze of that little girl that gave me the courage I lacked. It was not for myself, but for her still innocent body, for her still free mind, for her future that remained within reach. This marked the beginning of my real, silent rebellion, kept secret, filled with fear, but fueled by determination. I started planning carefully, preparing, observing constantly. I waited for the perfect moment, because I no longer wanted to run away alone. I wanted to save her. To save her was to save myself as well. The choice had already been made, but making it happen was an entirely different challenge. It was never just about running away. It was about finding the exact right time, the perfect silence, the precise lapse in attention. I spent countless days studying the movements inside the house, measuring schedules, memorizing when Roger went out drinking, the hours when my mother slept like a rock, the moments when the neighborhood filled with noise and no one noticed the hurried footsteps. I became like a wild animal, clever, distrustful, with senses always on high alert. I was no longer the quiet child, but a determined survivor, fighting to protect the little I had left, my sister, and the shadow of my dignity. For weeks, I pretended to be better. I walked with more confidence. My voice no longer trembled when I spoke. Sometimes I even laughed to throw Roger off. He seemed to loosen up, coming closer to me again, touching my arm with that disgusting familiarity, calling me ungrateful and skinny, but without the violence. The chaos from before was unleashed again. I endured it quietly, kept silent, served him his food. My mother remained just the same, a silent rock, mute to everything, a guardian of the false calm while the torment ate us from the inside. I looked at her with pity, not hatred. She was a dimmed human, soulless, reduced to a life of service, only knowing how to obey the strongest, even if it meant handing over her daughter and destroying all of us in the process. One night, I realized the moment had come. Roger had gone out drunk with one of his friends, and my mother had taken sleeping pills, a habit she had developed to block out the nightly screams. The house was silent, the sky covered with clouds, the street dark, all perfect. I went to my sister, who was already asleep on her mat. I whispered in her ear and gently shook her awake. She woke confused, but not scared. I told her we were going for a walk, that she needed to keep her voice low, hold my hand, and trust me. She did so without hesitation. She hugged me, let me dress her in the clothes I had prepared, and we slipped out the back door quietly, our hearts pounding as if ready to burst. We hurried barefoot along the dirt roads until we reached the avenue where the trucks passed. I knew that at this hour, although late, some bread or milk delivery workers were already starting their rounds. I sat with her on a bench and waited. My feet were burning, my legs ached. Yet I did not stop. I did not cry. I did not breathe freely until an old truck pulled over and the driver looked at us with curiosity. I quickly made up a story that we were his nieces, that we had gotten lost, and that we needed to reach the neighboring village. He believed me, or at least pretended to. He let us get on. We sat in the back among sacks of flour, holding each other tightly. The sound of the engine surrounded us. For the first time in years, I felt something close to hope. I did not know where we were headed. I had no one to call. I had nothing. But I was not there anymore. I was no longer in that house. I was no longer afraid of hearing footsteps in the hallway. I had broken the cycle. We arrived at the next village at dawn. The square was empty. The roosters were just beginning to crow. I approached a church, holding my sister asleep in my arms, and knocked on the sacristy door. I cried. I knelt down and begged the priest, an older man with a stern face, not to send me back. I told him part of the story, not everything. I could not reveal it all yet, but it was enough. They allowed us inside, gave us bread and milk. They called a woman who helped at Caritas, a kind lady who looked at me with eyes full of compassion and did not ask questions at first. She just let us rest, and I slept. I slept like I had not since I was a child, with my sister by my side, my body broken, but my soul a little less shattered. The following days felt like waking up from a coma. I was disoriented and wary. I could not believe it was true. I expected my mother to appear yelling, for Roger to arrive with his threats, or for someone to say it was all a mistake. But none of that happened. They took me to a shelter for minors. They separated me from my sister because the law required it, but they allowed us to see each other. The psychologist spoke to me gently. She asked if I wanted to report what had happened. I did not know how to answer. My whole body was shaking, but I nodded. I said yes, that I wanted them to pay, that I did not want this to happen to other girls. It was the hardest, most painful decision I had ever made, but also the most empowering. I made the report. I testified before the police. I cried in front of strangers. I felt shame, fear, anger, but I kept talking. I named the people, the dates, the things I could recall. They took notes and asked more questions. I left out some details out of shame, others because remembering them hurt me physically, but the truth came out. Roger was arrested a few days later. They found him drunk in a bar with his shirt dirty. My mother was called to testify. She said I was making things up, that I was ungrateful, crazy, and just seeking attention. I did not respond. I only looked at her from the courtroom, and for the first time she lowered her gaze. I could not hate her. I simply could not. I felt pity because she had also been a child once, a child who probably had no one to protect her. The legal process was slow, messy, full of obstacles. The assigned lawyer did not. I wanted to, but something shifted. The neighbour, who had suspicions, declared. An old teacher confirmed my story. The priest also signed a report that helped support my account. There was no harsh sentence, no complete justice. Roger spent several years in prison. He got out. My mother returned to her neighbourhood as if nothing had happened, but she no longer had control over me. She never came looking for me again, and I never saw her anymore. She died many years later, alone, with no one by her side. When they told me this, I felt no joy, no relief, no pain. I felt emptiness. As for me, I went through foster homes, temporary shelters. I ended up cleaning in a convent where, for the first time, someone asked me what I wanted to do with my life. I studied as much as I could. I raised my sister as if she were my own daughter. I worked washing clothes, cleaning floors, selling bread. I survived. I did not live like other women. I never started a family. I never knew what it was like to be loved by a man. But I did know what it meant to care for someone, to protect, to not repeat the past. Today, my sister is a mother. She calls me Mom Carol, and when her children run around my house, I feel complete. Even though my body is broken, even though my bones ache, even though my nights are still haunted by ghosts. The day I walked out that door, holding my little sister's hand, was the most important day of my life. It was the day I finally chose myself. Now that I am old, my body constantly demanding rest. Doctors advise me not to climb a single step without supporting myself properly. I often think about that little girl I once was. Sometimes I picture her sitting quietly in the corner of my room, thin, with wide eyes full of fear. She appears when I am alone, especially during the early hours when the silence in the house feels heavy in my ears. She does not speak or blame me. She just looks at me. She looks as if asking me not to forget her, not to let all those memories fade away into the dust of the years. And I do not forget her, nor do I want to. Because that child, that broken soul whom no one protected or embraced, who was sold as if she were nothing, was also the seed of the woman I am today. A woman who endured, who fought, who cared for another child like a daughter, and who unintentionally became a refuge when she never had one herself. I cannot say that the pain disappears. No, that would not be fair. People believe that as years pass, wounds become smaller, they heal, and we get used to them. That is not true. Childhood wounds do not close. They transform, change shape, move to different places like the back, the lungs, or the bones. They become part of the body. Some days my hip hurts, but it is not my hip, it is the memory. Certain nights I wake up restless, sweating, heart racing as if I were 15 and someone had just knocked on my door. It takes me a few minutes to remember I'm no longer there, that the house no longer exists. There is a feeling that the bed is no longer the same, and that my body finally belongs to me, even though I am tired now. For many years I believed I would never be able to speak about this. I stayed silent for so long that my voice nearly disappeared. I learned to avoid the past, to tell half-truths, to force smiles where there was sorrow. I raised my sister with a solemn promise that she would never know everything I went through. I did not want her to see that horror in her eyes. I wanted her to grow up free, without the burden of my story, without the poison of our origins. And for a while, I succeeded. She was happy. She attended school, played, fell in love, had children, made me a grandmother, and unknowingly turned me into the mother I never had. But as the years passed, the truth began to demand space. Excuses were no longer enough. Silence no longer served me. So, gradually, I started sharing my story first with the psychologist at the centre where I worked, then with a trusted friend, and later with my grown sister. I looked into her eyes and said I did not want to die without explaining why I protected her so much, why I never slept far from her, why I feared men so deeply. She cried, hugged me, did not ask for details, only said she finally understood everything, and that embrace healed me more than any words ever could. Sometimes I think about my mother, not with the hatred I used to carry as a young woman, but with profound sadness. I wonder who hurt her. I wonder what Carol experienced in her childhood that caused her heart to grow so cold. I do not excuse her actions or forgive her, but I do understand. I know many women like her were born into worlds where survival meant betraying, staying silent, and giving up parts of themselves. That does not absolve her of guilt, but it helps me make sense of it. What I cannot forgive is that she never apologized, never reached out to me, never said, "Daughter, what I did to you was awful." She died as she lived in silence without looking back. I had to learn to live with that lack of closure, with the absence of redemption. I had to accept that sometimes forgiveness never comes, and that is okay, because forgiveness is not always required to heal. Sometimes it is enough to take distance, to build a different life, to say, "I will not repeat this." For the last several years, I have been writing pieces of my story in old notebooks, on loose papers, not to share with anyone or publish, but to remember. I fear the day my memory fails, my body betrays me, and those voices from the past vanish into the fog. I do not want that to happen. I want someone, someday, some woman, to find these words and know she is not alone. To know what happened was not her fault, that no child deserves punishment, that abuse is not love, that family does not justify silence, that escaping is not betrayal, but courage, and that simply surviving is already a heroic act. I watch my grandchildren and great-grandchildren running around the house, and in each of them I see a small triumph, not because their lives are flawless, but because they are not afraid to speak up, since their mother and grandmother taught them that the body deserves respect, that tears should be heard, and that love does not hurt. In those moments, when I hear them laughing or arguing over toys, I realize that although I never had a childhood, I managed to create others that are freer, safer, and happier. Perhaps that was my purpose. Maybe that is why I did not die in that house. Perhaps that is why I endured so much to get to this point and be able to say it. With this old yet steady voice, I lived a childhood that no one should experience. I was used, betrayed, and sold. But I was also strong, brave, and capable of breaking a cycle that had lasted a long time. I did not become what pain wanted me to be. I did not repeat the pattern or stay silent forever. I am alive, and for me, that alone is enough.